As I said, we'll now turn to our second speaker on the proposition, Joshua Lim. Joshua is a first-year undergraduate reading HSPS at Wolfson College. They won the right to speak through open audition. Joshua, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. President. All right. Good evening, Mr. President, fellow members of the House, distinguished guests on both sides, ladies and gentlemen. What an honor and privilege it is to be speaking with you today. This House believes we have the right to die. I want to start off with a very personal story, opposing to what Yuan spoke about regarding sharing stories to tear down your moral obligations. When I was 14, some 8 years ago, my then 15-year-old father suffered a brainstem stroke. His particular case could be considered a very terminal one, with doctors assuming that he would die in the next month or so. And they were preparing us for worst-case scenarios and the very high likelihood of death. For the next 8 years before his passing, my father lived a life in which he was completely dependent on us, his family. My father, prior to his illness, was a brilliant man. Everyone knew John. He was the most charismatic, the most jovial, the most energetic man that I knew. The stroke placed my father in an extremely vulnerable and compromised state of life. Simplest tasks like urinating had to be done via urostomy, nutrition had to be done via tube, and he was completely unable to walk, move, or talk. Palliative care was simply not working for him. It only prolonged his suffering. And he was completely reliant on us, his family, and I knew that the pain of the countless tubes and the wires could not compare to the sheer amount of shame, lack of dignity that he felt. In Singapore, where I'm from, there is no right to die either. I believe that my father, would he have had the option, would have chosen to have had the right to die, not simply to end his suffering, but so that he could leave this world in a dignified manner and at a time where he determined best. I believe my father deserved a choice. I believe he deserved the right to die. Tonight, my aim is not to appeal to a rigorous ethical analysis, but instead, I invite you to listen to your own moral intuitions. Indeed, not having the right to die is to burden one with the duty to suffer. Today, I propose two main arguments. Firstly, the moral ethical argument that the right to die and the right to life are two sides of the very same coin. Secondly, in cases of extreme suffering and pain, a patient should be provided with the opportunity and the autonomy to end their suffering. Their suffering is theirs, and it is only theirs. It's not ours. I'm certain, and I certainly do hope, that everyone here stands with me when I say we all have the right to life. Indeed, having the right to life and the right to die are two sides of the very same coin. They are not separate arguments. The right to life also encompasses the right of individual liberty for one to determine whether or not they will or will not continue living. And I say again, the right to life also encompasses the right to individual liberty for one to determine whether or not one will or will not continue living. Should the right to life only be the right to continue living and not include a right to decide not to continue living, then this would be a duty to live, not a right. We obtain the right or meaning to live through the right to die. The right to life becomes meaningless when we have no right to die. Go for it.
It's very easy to talk about individual liberties here and make out this choice, but all of our choices are in a social context. We heard from the opposition side of an example of a woman in Canada who chose assisted dying because she had disabilities, she had allergies, and the government refused to provide her social housing that would result in these allergies not causing her a terrible quality of life. In what sense did she really have free choice? Or was it not more the case that she felt that she had no choice in this situation and had no choice but to die because the government was not willing to keep her alive?
So I think there's a very clear distinction to be made between individuals who go through such situations and making sure that there are options for them. So what we are arguing today is not about, definitely those who are vulnerable, you do have to take them into consideration. What I'm saying is that we should have stringent processes and criteria in which we allow for individuals like that. For example, if you look in Netherlands, so many psychologists have come together to make sure there are stringent criteria in place before someone should have the opportunity to have the right to die. So, as I carry on. Secondly, suffering is something that belongs to people. It should not be the subjectivities of others. I should have the full autonomy and liberty to choose that. If you take that choice away from me, you selfishly take my suffering away from me. No, let me carry on. My father's right to end his suffering was denied. Instead, it became his duty to suffer. Imagine with me, a patient or a person is in a pit and they're burning. That person has a gun, and the gun will allow for them to end their suffering. What the other side is trying to do is take away that gun. And they're standing on the rims of the pit, and they're looking at that person and telling them, you have to suffer. You have the duty to suffer and continue suffering. Isn't it so selfish then for an individual to decide when they should die? Wouldn't the closest family members, loved ones, companions of the patients be the very ones to have to bear the brunt of the patient's autonomous death? I was in that very position myself, where my family requested for my father's repeated resuscitation, a total of 5 times in a span of 2 hours before his death. His ribs were completely shattered. I remember the look of fear, pain, and helplessness in his eyes that night. He bore the duty to suffer, and we prolonged his passing, just so the entire family could say our final goodbyes. How selfish of us. Indeed, it is even more selfish of the loved ones, of anyone, to sentence another to prolong suffering. We took that suffering away from him, and we made it ours. Till today, I carry this burden and regret. I only wish that my father had the opportunity and the option, as what Rabbi said, to go sooner and in a dignified manner. If you think a particular life is worth living, then you should live it yourself. If you won't and you can't, then at the very least, it should not be a matter of politics, but of individual autonomy. So I brought this story today because it is the experiences of those who are suffering that should form the very center of this argument. They should have the liberty. They should have the choice. They should have the right to die. Look, I know my dad. I loved him. I still love him. But I also know he would have liked to live, or rather to leave this life in a dignified manner. He would have liked that. Indeed, not having the right to die is to burden one with the duty to suffer. Thank you.